All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. If people are coming in as we're going, I'll keep letting them in. My name is Julie. I am the events manager at Roundabout Books. If you haven't been able to come to one of our Zoom meetings recently, they are on our YouTube page, and you can actually go to our events calendar for the event that you maybe weren't able to make it to and find the YouTube link on that event page on our calendar. So I just want to do a couple of announcements about the bookstore. We are still open, have been open the whole time, every day 10 to 5. We are still doing our owl delivery as well as our red bench pickup. So if you're unable to come to into the store, you can always give us a call, get your book over the phone, pick it up off the red bench, easy peasy. And we've got some great events coming up in May and June. Make sure to check out the event calendar. So I think we're going to have a really good event tonight, and I still see people coming in from the waiting room. So don't worry, this is also being recorded for YouTube. So if you feel like you're late to the party, you're not. You can watch all of it on YouTube as well. So we are really excited to welcome Les Joslin for his book, The Three Sisters Wilderness. Les is regionally and nationally recognized wilderness educator and recipient of the U.S. Forest Service Chiefs Wilderness Education Leadership Award. That's a mouthful. A retired U.S. Navy commander and a former U.S. Forest Service firefighter, wilderness ranger, and staff officer. He's a graduate of San Jose State College and holds master's degrees from the University of Colorado and the University of London. He served 14 seasons in the Three Sisters Wilderness and is the author of a dozen published books. So I'm very excited to hear more about this book, and you have it there with you so you can show everyone the cover. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Julie. Good evening to everybody. And I want to thank Roundabout Books, which is my favorite independent bookstore, for sponsoring this little talk about my new book here. Let's see, how do I, yeah.
Perfect.
The Three Sisters Wilderness, A History, which has just been published by the History Press, which is an imprint of another publisher that I've worked with. This is an informal Zoom talk in which I and my raspy old voice plan to introduce this new book to you, telling you what it's about and why I wrote it, and answering any questions that you may have. So please feel free to ask any questions about what I say or raise any topic you think I should mention that I don't. The Three Sisters Wilderness, as you might have already gathered, occupies a special place in my life and holds a special place in my heart. I served 14 summers in the Three Sisters Wilderness on behalf of the Deschutes National Forest in a variety of capacities, but mostly focused on visitor information and education. This was all field work, which was the good news, not office work. And I got to know the eastern third of the Three Sisters Wilderness well. Just the eastern third, because the western 2/3 of the Three Sisters Wilderness are in the Willamette National Forest, and I, of course, was working for the Deschutes National Forest. Associated with these 14 summers were academic opportunities for Central Oregon Community College and Oregon State University students who took the wilderness courses I taught for both of those institutions. Some of those students availed themselves of summer term college internships that I offered and were among the 95 volunteers who served the public as uniformed wilderness information specialists in the volunteer program I ran from 1993 to 2005 as part of the Wilderness Information and Education Program on the Deschutes National Forest. My new book, I have to confess, is a revised and improved version of a book that I developed for those students and the other volunteers in my Wilderness Information Specialist program. So, just what's this book all about? What makes it different? What even makes it necessary? At least I think it's necessary. I introduced the whole idea this way with a statement to the effect, there are many excellent hiking and backpacking guides to the Three Sisters Wilderness, but this is not one of them. This book instead is a brief guide to a more profound wilderness experience. It's a guide to understanding the Three Sisters Wilderness as wilderness, to its natural and cultural history, and to the philosophical, legal, and management concepts that combine to keep it a wilderness. A wilderness as defined by Congress in the 1964 Act that provides for wilderness preservation on on American public lands managed by 4 different U.S. government agencies. My experience shows me that wilderness is a word and an idea that Americans are still learning, and I state that in the beginning of the book too. It's a word that means different things to different people. Appreciation and understanding of that word and idea is expressed in the Wilderness Act of 1964, the National Wilderness Preservation System established by that act, and the Three Sisters Wilderness, one of the original 54 wildernesses designated by that act. And gaining this appreciation and understanding of these is the real purpose of the book. So what the book boils down to is a brief survey of the natural and cultural history of the Three Sisters country, which since 1964 has been kept wild by law as the Three Sisters Wilderness. Why? Because I believe that such appreciation enhances the use and enjoyment of the Three Sisters Wilderness and is essential to its use and enjoyment in such manner as will leave it and other National Wilderness Preservation System units, of which there are now over 800, unimpaired for future use and enjoyment. My quote marks are from the Wilderness Act. That act, by the way, has been recognized for some of the best prose ever in a congressional act, at least in the front part. So how do I go about it in the 175 pages and 90 photographs that are inside this binding here? I do it in 4 chapters. In the first chapter, I introduce you to the concept of wilderness as it evolved eventually to be expressed in the Wilderness Act of 1964, as well as on the ground in Americans' national forests, national parks, fish and wildlife refuges, and other federal public lands that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management. In this first chapter, you meet the people who evolved both the idea as well as the reality of wilderness preservation. You meet people like Aldo Leopold, who many of you, probably all of you, are familiar with, and Arthur Carhart, who are U.S. Forest Service wilderness pioneers. Aldo Leopold began his esteemed career as an environmentalist as a U.S. Forest Service officer. Another person involved, whom you probably never heard of, was a guy named Leon F. Knipe, who was the father of the National Forest Primitive Area System, one of the former forerunners of the Wilderness Preservation System. Oddly enough, I had heard of him because his grandson took over a job that I'd had in the mid-1960s with the Forest Service before I went on active duty in the Navy. His name was Tom Knipe. I have no idea whatever happened to him, but he seemed like a squared away guy, like his grandfather must have been. Another of these persons who brought us wilderness as we know it today was Bob Marshall. He was the father of the National Forest wilderness idea and of National Forest wilderness areas. Howard Zohnheiser, the author of the Wilderness Act of 1964, under which the Three Sisters Wilderness was established and the National Wilderness Preservation System grew from 54 original units to over 800 today, is another one of these often unsung heroes. And there are a few others who we will meet in the book in chapter 1. Chapters 2 and 3 cover the natural and cultural history of the Three Sisters Wilderness. The geographer in me comes out in chapter 2, in which I have taken the liberty of dividing the Three Sisters Wilderness into 3 regions based on their distinct natural characteristics and as well as distinctive plant and animal communities. These 3 regions that I've divided the Three Sisters Wilderness into, and there's a map of them in the book, are the Alpine Crest region, which comprises the higher Cascade Crest peaks and their immediate surroundings, the lower Crest region, which is the Cascade Crest south of those higher Cascades peaks, and then the Western Plateaus and Canyons region west of the Cascade Crest, which is that 2/3 or almost 2/3 of the Three Sisters Wilderness, which is within the Willamette National Forest. Chapter 3 focuses on the sequential human use of the land now included in the Three Sisters Wilderness. Geographers talk about sequent occupants of landscapes, but at least the higher lands in the Three Sisters Wilderness were seasonally used rather than ever permanently occupied. So we can't really talk about sequent occupants as more than but we can better talk about sequent annual utilization of this land. The first, of course, were the Native Americans who visited and utilized some of the resources which are now within the Three Sisters Wilderness. And then came Euro-American discovery and exploitation, and Euro-American discovery and exploration, followed by Euro-American exploitation and eventually conservation. Now, if I were to tell you all about that, 1, we wouldn't have time, and 2, you wouldn't buy the book. So I'm going to chapter 4 now, which is about managing the Three Sisters Wilderness as wilderness pursuant to the criteria that are set forth in the Wilderness Act of 1964. In chapter 4, I cover such topics as the nature of wilderness as a resource, and we define the concept of resource and see how wilderness qualifies as a resource. We look at how the wilderness resource is managed and how it's managed according to management principles that address certain issues in a way that is set forth by the detailed language in the Wilderness Act of 1964. Then we get down to the people who carry out the management: wilderness managers, wilderness rangers, and wilderness volunteers. We look briefly at such necessary topics as the funding of wilderness management, which some of you may have heard is an increasing challenge. And then we look at citizen involvement in wilderness management and how citizens can take affirmative actions that help promote and preserve wilderness in such a way that meets their expectations as well as meets Wilderness Act standards. As I mentioned before, the book is illustrated by a few maps and graphics and by many historic and contemporary photographs, all of which have been selected to help the reader visualize the ideas covered in the 4 chapters. 32 of these photographs are in a full cover, I don't know what you call this section of a book, a folio or something, but it looks kind of like that. Those are some of the friendly critters in the wilderness there. And, you know, some rather unique ecological associations are explained. Anyway, those photographs help address topics along with black and white photos that address topics such as the grazing that used to occur in the Three Sisters Wilderness from the early days of Central Oregon settlement up into the 1960s and 70s. Some of the most interesting of those photographs are from historic photographs from Forest Service and other archives. Others were made by co-workers and friends, and a bunch of them I made myself in the course of my years enjoying working with people in the Three Sisters Wilderness. Well, that's about the size of it as far as a summary of what the book is about. And I'm sure that, well, I hope that anyway, I've stimulated some questions that you can ask and that I can give you acceptable answers to. How do you do that, Julie? Do you?
Well, we can do it a couple different ways. There is a chat function where people can type in their questions and I can read them out loud. People can also kind of there's a raise hand function with you click on your profile and then I can unmute you. I actually had one to start with. Since this book was previously, you said, kind of used in an educational purpose, how did you like make the changes so that it like opened it up to the general population to read? Did you make a lot of changes?
I did a lot of updating and revising, but my students reflect the general population for the most part. They were community college students, they were community education students, they were Oregon State University upper division students, depending on which course they were taking it, the book was being used for. So the real part was a rewrite and a revision to improve it as much as I could and to bring it more up to date. And of course, there's something going on right now that I mentioned in it that back before publication, just before publication, there was no way to know exactly how this was going to be resolved. And that, of course, is the new permit system that is going to change quite a few aspects of public access to the wilderness in order to reduce human impact on the natural environment, but still permit human enjoyment of the environment while it's maintained at wilderness standards. So is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, that sounds great. And we had an author last week with a book about hiking Mount Hood, and he is very involved in the PCT and this permit system. So I got a little education. Louise asked kind of a similar question. How do you feel about the permit system, and will it alleviate stress on the day hiking trails that I love?
Well, it will reduce the amount of traffic on the day hiking trails that Louise loves. and that I love. So that will, depends on how you define stress. It will certainly reduce the number of people that you meet from what it was last year or the year before. Since I began working in the Three Sisters Wilderness, the measured visitation has increased about fivefold. And that's based on various counts taken while trails were, by wilderness rangers, while encountering people on trails, as well as at trailheads and from permit systems and so forth. So it's a concomitant of the growing population of Central Oregon. I moved to Central Oregon in 1988. And when I moved to Bend, the population of Bend was 19,000 people. We're talking about inside the city limits. And now it's 106,000 people and growing like wildfire. A lot of you, well, all of you have obviously have certainly witnessed that. So that plus successful promotion by the local visitor industry has significantly impacted the wilderness resource to the extent that these measures, which are sometimes difficult to accept, have had to be taken in order to comply with the law that established wilderness to be preserved in the first place.
Dinah has a question. She said, where did some of the grazing take place? Wikiup Plains or around Moraine Lake?
The grazing was both by sheep and cattle. There's an interesting photograph in the book. In fact, it's the black and white one I showed while I had the book open, of a cattle drive at the northern end of the Green Lakes. And those cattle came from the area east of Sisters, two ranches there, and they would drive them up over the pass there and then past the Green Lakes and down the very trail that people take to go up to the Green Lakes, across the Cascade Lakes Highway into the Sparks Lakes Meadow, where until the early 1990s, there was a cattle grazing allotment. The sheep grazed more widely, and they would move up country throughout most of the Three Sisters Wilderness, except for the heavily timbered. They went where the grass was, not where the timber was. And they would move up country as the snow melted away and the grass became available.
That's cool. Cheryl has a question. Do you know why the Forest Service abandoned the trails to places like Horse Mountain, Pack Saddle Mountain, and Burnt Top after the lookouts were removed?
I don't know the specific reason, except for probably the fact that there was no longer an official administrative need for the trails to get to those lookouts. And they may well not have had funding, which if they were trails to lookouts, their maintenance was probably funded through the fire program rather than through the wilderness program. And it wouldn't have funds to maintain them. You think, what does it cost? Well, it costs for people to use crosscut saws, which take a little bit more time than power saws to log out trails, and of course, to maintain the grade and so forth. So that's the best answer that I can pull off the top of my head. I believe all of those examples, if I heard correctly, were over on the Willamette National Forest side, of which I would hate to claim ignorance, but can do so when I'm pushed into a corner.
Ted has a question. How unique is the Three Sisters Wilderness versus other wilderness areas? Terrain, history, administration, human use, and risks to its remaining wilderness.
How do I rate it?
Well, how unique? You said that
Oh, how unique is it?
Yeah, compared to maybe some other wilderness areas that we might be familiar with.
Well, I think it's one of the more spectacular wildernesses that I've been in. I think every wilderness, or at least most, have the qualities that make them unique in their own right. Unique is an interesting word. It's something is either unique or it's not, because it comes from the Latin unus equus, which means one horse, which means it's one of a kind. So the Three Sisters Wilderness is unique in that, in its own character, just as are others. I think it's among the more spectacular landscapes in the system, but there are many spectacular landscapes in the system which I haven't and never will see. I would like to see them, but I won't. I've walked the Pacific Crest Trail, not in a work capacity, but as a recreator, from the California border to the Washington border. And there are several really fascinating stretches along the trail. But even though I was more familiar with it than any place else, I found the Three Sisters Wilderness stretch, just under 50 miles through the Three Sisters Wilderness, one of the more moving and fascinating stretches.
Let's talk about a little bit of his question still, and then Louise has one. But what are the risks kind of right now to the Three Sisters Wilderness? Is it, because I know there's been fires out there, obviously, and some of those, or majority of those, are human caused. So is it more just that people are not taking care of it?
It is associated with traffic as well as short-term occupants. There are, the more people who use a trail, the more the impact is on the tread of the trail, and oftentimes the wider a trail will become because of people passing more frequently than they did when there were fewer users of the trail. When people camp, I never use a campfire. I've never, ever had a campfire when I've camped. But a lot of people like a campfire. Maybe one reason I don't use a campfire is I can't stand cooking. You know, I just take stuff along and eat it. A lot of people, a campfire is part of the experience. Well, you have to have fuel. You gather that fuel, and sometimes that is even more impactful than other times. And sometimes people will cut live trees for fuel if all the dead fuel is gone. And a lot of the dead vegetation is a part of the scenic landscape. So it becomes less wild through that kind of use. The other end of cooking a meal is disposing of it a few hours later, and the evidence of improper disposal of human waste in the Three Sisters Wilderness has exploded. In the 1990s and early part of this century, I would clean up quite a bit of human waste, but my successors are saddled with a lot more of that now than I was. So it's just more people using the same resource and wearing it down and leaving their marks there that push the boundaries of the criteria for wilderness set forth in the Wilderness Act and operationalized in the principles of wilderness management that are explained in Chapter 4.
Excellent, thank you. Louise had a request. If you would please read one of your favorite descriptive passages.
Oh, I don't. Who wants to know this?
Louise Hawker.
Yeah, Louise. Thanks for your question, Louise. Louise is an old friend. Would you allow me to take your question and research it? Because it's going to be hard for me to find a favorite passage or any passage that probably meets your criterion and call you up and respond that way. I can't hear Louise, but.
Oh, here, try that again, Louise. I thought I heard you for a second. Let me see, hold on. Let's see if I can fix it. Where'd you go? There you go. Can you hear me?
It would be wonderful, thank you.
Okay, I heard that, Louise.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for letting me off the hook.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Ted's got some good ones. How different and in what ways is the wilderness different from the way it was 200 years ago?
Well, I wasn't there 200 years ago, although looking at me, you might be able to believe that I was. But 200 years ago, there were very few trails. Trails that were there would have been Native American trails accessing specific resources like berries and other vegetation that they would make use of, as well as hunting wildlife, but they didn't live there. And if there were trails, it was trails just by constant use of the same route. They didn't build and maintain trails. Now, more recent use by non-Native Americans or by the whole visitor population is a bit more impactful. Native Americans 200 years ago didn't use livestock in this part of the country. Now I know what's going to happen. The livestock people are going to jump on. I'm a user of livestock when the job called for it, and I'm supportive of every permitted use. So I wasn't just saying that livestock weren't a good idea. They can get you there faster when you need to get there. Now I've digressed so much, I forgot the original question.
Well, let me ask this too, maybe as an offshoot of Ted's question. Do you know if there's been a lot of like change in the flora? Like, are there new trees, maybe as not calling them invasive species necessarily, but that have been tracked in by visitors that have therefore maybe changed the landscape a little?
No, I don't think that the nature of the forest cover type has been significantly affected by human trafficking. It could well have been significantly affected by human-caused wildfires.
Mm.
But wildfires are a natural part of a wilderness environment, as long as they're not burning in unnatural fuel loads. With regard to smaller plant species, Pat, are you there? My wife was a Deschutes National Forest botanist.
Oh, okay.
And she's obviously gone off to do something else now. I see her name, but I don't see her face anymore.
No, I took my face off, but I just unmuted myself, so I'm here.
Did you hear the question?
Yes, there's lots of the plants we found out there are what you would expect to be out there. I don't know if grazing might have taken some plants out that should possibly could be there, could have been there. But right now we do have some sensitive plants up there that I'm not working for the Forest Service anymore, but for many years we have been looking out for the Pumice grape fern, which is a native to Central Oregon and which is up in the wilderness. I've seen there are several populations up there. It seems to be doing okay. There are a few other plants here. I won't go into them all, but most of the plants seem what you would expect to be in at that elevation and in these dry sites.
Awesome. Thank you for adding that. That's fun.
If the Pumice grape fern is new to anyone, there it is. And about life size, it's about 1.5 inches tall at its most majestic.
Wow.
And there's Pat monitoring it up there.
Very cool. So we do have a couple more questions in the chat. Louise asked, do you think some of the popular trails, such as Green Lakes, should be blocked off for a while to recover?
No, I don't think so, Louise. I think that they should be used by smaller populations, which is what the new access permit system is attempting to accomplish, because I'm afraid that blocking these trails off entirely would offset use to other trails, to greater detriment to them, and also. And I know that it would be unpopular with wilderness visitors, even more unpopular than the current, than the limitations that have to be, limitations of the use that have to be made to prevent further degradation, not only just of the trails, but of the resource that they lead through into.
Excellent, thank you. Rob, who it sounds like is joining us from Pennsylvania, which is so cool. I live in Pennsylvania and have traveled to the Three Sisters to hike the PCT and other trails. Last time there, I saw a black fox, a first for me. Did you ever see one or something unusual in your time out in the wilderness?
I saw the south end of a northbound cougar once. And I haven't seen a black, that as I recall is a Sierra Nevada black fox, which has been rarely reported here. So Rob, if you saw him, you're among the noted few, the lucky few. There was just a report recently about a sighting of that fox. I believe it was last summer. When were you, when did you sight this fox?
Yeah, here, Rob, if you want, I can unmute you too. Hold on. Where are you? There we go. You want to actually talk.
Okay.
Last October?
Oh, yeah, it was. It was last October.
You're not the reported sighting, are you?
Oh no, I didn't know who to report it to. I guess maybe the Forest Service or somebody probably should have reported it, but I did get a grainy picture with my cell phone. I think because the trails were pretty sparse. There wasn't a lot of folks because I had canceled the trip a couple times, at least tentatively, because of the wildfires and of course COVID and everything. I just happened to land on I have a friend in Prineville, hope I'm saying that right, who hosted me and got me to the trail. And he said, boy, you found the 1 week that you could have made that trip, because between COVID and everything else. But anyway, all that to say that the trails were pretty sparse. There weren't many people out at all. And
Right.
I think maybe it felt comfortable to travel at that time. So yeah, it was unusual. I thought it was a border collie at first. But
May I ask where in Pennsylvania you are?
I'm in central Pennsylvania, so about an hour west of State College. So we're in the Laurel Highlands, about 2,000 foot elevation.
I only asked because I spent 4 years in southeastern Pennsylvania, Delaware County, when I was a youngster.
Oh, nice. Yeah, well, the AT doesn't go, the Appalachian Trail doesn't go far from there. Yeah.
No, just a lot of traffic. In those
Yeah,
days,
right. Yeah.
old commuter trolleys.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it was a pleasure hearing about the history. Thanks so much for the book.
Yeah,
Thank you,
for
sir.
joining us.
Could I butt in there for a minute? Rob, if you ever see any wildlife on a national forest or in a wilderness, usually the local Forest Service wildlife biologists love to get any reports, because they will always check them and they will always keep them noted. It's really important for them to know if there are unusual wildlife, if there's any unusual wildlife animal in an area.
Well, good to know. Yeah, I in hindsight, I should have contacted somebody, but thank you.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, do we have any last questions? I just want to remind everyone we have copies at the store. And Rob, if you haven't gotten one yet, we will ship anywhere. We have signed copies, and if for any reason we run out of them, please let the bookseller know. If you want a signed copy, we can make sure we get those from Les. So I know myself personally, I really like signed copies. It's a fun display on my bookshelf. Yeah, do we have any final questions? Les, how do you feel? Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there's going to be a lot of use and impact coming up as the COVID restrictions get lifted, or do you think it's been still pretty steady?
I think people are ready to get out and get going. I think that across the country, you'll find the public lands and their recreational opportunities heavily subscribed this year. After COVID is unless some things get canceled because of it.
Right.
I have a friend who runs Sierra Club tours around. Well, he does it around the world, but I help him with ones in parts of the West I know. And he's got one scheduled from my old stomping grounds in the Eastern Sierra. Old stomping grounds. This is from like 60 years ago or more, or it's 55, 60 years ago. And I'm going to be the local color guy unless it's canceled. Mm-hmm. So the COVID situation, it seems to play in two ways. One, I just got to get out of the house that I've been in for the last 15 months and do something. And wilderness and other outdoor recreation opportunities allow the spacing, the distancing that makes it less dangerous from the pandemic point of view. And so I think the impact will be the same, except for cancellations based on concerns of groups doing things.
Yeah.
I don't claim any more expertise than I tried to just reflect.
Yeah. So we have two questions that are kind of related. So Dina was wondering, she said, I rarely see any wildlife except birds. Of course, there are the elk. but do most of the wildlife stay quite hidden? And Ted's question following up is, any wolves seen out there yet?
There have been, well, I'm not aware of a wolf being seen in the Three Sisters Wilderness. In the Cascades south of here, down around Crater Lake National Park, on the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, they've been tracking one wolf. I think he's got a number, who's come up from California.
Mhm.
I don't keep track of wildlife sightings very much. All I know is what I read in the papers. So yeah, I'm not aware of a wolf being seen in the Three Sisters Wilderness yet. Now, what were the other examples?
Well, Dina was just asking about, do most of the wildlife stay quite hidden? And to your point, you said you saw the back end of a big cat. But I mean, it's maybe traveled enough during the day that the wildlife does, bed down and you don't see a lot of what is actually out there.
I think they hear you coming,
Yeah.
and they have often. I'm sure that they've got better things to do than look at people, especially people who have their puppy dogs with them, who will chase them.
Yeah.
On certain heavily used trails, there at certain times of year, there are, because of wildlife as well as other concerns, there are leash regulations for dogs. It's not year round anywhere, and it's only on the more heavily traveled trails.
Yeah.
So I think that, there's plenty of country that people don't access through trails that wildlife can retreat to and enjoy themselves. There's solitude, but that's just my personal hunch.
Well, thank you for the questions, everyone. This has been a wonderful discussion. If we have any last ones, go ahead and pop them in the chat. But I don't want to tax your voice much more, Les. This has been such a great discussion, and I'm now thinking your book is going to make a couple really good, possibly Mother's Day and Father's Day gift. My dad used to work with the Forest Service, so I think he'll like it.
I'm happy when somebody derives some benefit from having seen it, read it. And I do want to apologize for my raspy voice. It comes and goes. I spent 4 hours this morning raking pine needles down at the High Desert Museum around an exhibit I'm responsible for to reduce the fuel loads there. And I think I might have sucked up a little too much pollen or something, dust maybe. At any rate,
good reminder that we do have a lot of really fun outdoor stuff that's not necessarily out in the wilderness, but things like the High Desert Museum are really fun, summer attractions. I love that place.
Yes, and the National Forest System, National Forest lands that aren't in congressionally designated wilderness, which are more readily accessible, have large campgrounds and resorts and other facilities from which you can launch your day trips into the wilderness.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. It sounds like from across the country. There's so many things you could be doing, Zoom events, and I just really appreciate your support of not only an independent author like Les, something hyper local like the Three Sisters Wilderness, and of course our bookstore, which we would not be here without our authors and all of our customers. So thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Les. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and sign off. Remember to check our website for new events, the link to this if you want to send it to someone later, and pick your book up at Roundabout. We're open every day from 10 to 5. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Les. Have a great